Response to the killings of councillors and municipal managers in South Africa, the South African Local Government Association, which is SALGA, recently conducted a study to determine the extent of violence and intimidation in local government structures. The report's findings have revealed disturbing trends that have emerged as reasons for threats and those killings. But to talk to us more about this issue, we joined in our studios in Johannesburg by Councillor Parks Tau. He is SALGA President. Ntate Tau, good morning to you and thank you so much for joining us on Morning Live.
Thank you very much and good morning.
Yeah, just before we look at the report itself, I mean, the topic on everyone's lips this morning is the midterm budget presented by Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba yesterday. I do know that SALGA had called for an increase in fiscal share for local government. Are you happy with what he tabled yesterday?
Well, firstly, let me indicate that we did have the opportunity to make a submission on behalf of local government to the minister prior to the midterm budget review, and the minister did take into account the issues that we raised. He did indicate the constraints within which he is operating, which partly is the reality that this is a midterm review, so we should expect further engagement as he prepares for the budget speech in February. Secondly, I think that we're cognizant of the reality of the lackluster economic performance and therefore the constraints with regards to revenue that there is. That notwithstanding, our submission remains that the formula of allocation of resources to government needs to change. And that needs to change in a manner that is more biased towards local government and thus enabling local authorities to deal with the most pressing challenges with regards to revenue. The allocation has increased slightly from 9.1% to 9.2% of the overall budget. But we expect that the overall formula should change in a manner in a manner significant that would enable local government to respond to some of the most pressing needs, including high levels of urbanization and migration, not just to the large cities, but also to the intermediary cities that are facing huge pressure. The increased demands on local government for services such as water, sanitation, electricity, road infrastructure, libraries, and so on. And the requirement of local government to execute in certain instances responsibilities that are responsibilities of national and provincial government.
All right, so you'll wait and see what happens in February, basically. Let's just move along to the political killings in Ntate Tau. I know that in August, SALGA made a presentation at the Moerane Commission inquiry that's currently investigating political killings in the KZN province. What are your expectations as SALGA from that particular commission?
Well, firstly, we think that the commission is an important initiative that's looking at the area where there's the highest concentration. Almost 50% of killings of local councillors are happening in KwaZulu-Natal, and I think that the intervention of having a commission there is important to the extent that it would be able to look at the causes of the violence, but also the measures that would be necessary to mitigate the violence. In our own study with regards to the matter, we've established the causes of violence. It's a study that we released last month, and it indicated that some of the causes have to do with, to a large extent, periods of elections. We find that there's heightened violence during periods of elections. We are also finding that as councillors improve their oversight responsibilities in the municipalities, there tends to be intimidation and violence. We've also noted that some of the killings have to do with matters that might be outside the municipality, but those are issues that are significant that we need to take into account. We have said that it is important that the killing of councillors becomes a priority crime because in reality it is an affront to our democracy. It impacts the way in which we are able to execute our responsibilities as local government representatives. It also impacts the way in which people want to participate in the democratic system itself. So you're having people resigning as municipal administrators, as councillors, because they feel intimidated. And sometimes people do not avail themselves to participate in this. And therefore, this is an affront to our democracy itself.
And of course, the report continues to indicate that 65% of municipal officials would be encouraged to quit their jobs due to those threats and violence. But the report itself, it's also identified tender awarding and job opportunities as some of the main reasons behind these threats. Which provinces are the threats at an increase maybe?
Well, if you're talking about the threats are almost in all the provinces. We're finding that in particular in smaller municipalities where people are competing for resources, you have a heightened demand on councillors and administrators to award tenders to particular individuals and or contractors. But this is on a per capita basis if you think about it. And the reality is that we still expect, and all of South Africa expects, that the allocation of tenders and allocation of jobs would be in line with the norms and standards, regulations and principles that allow objectivity in decision-making, but also protect councillors from the process of decision-making when it comes to the awarding of tenders. Our system allows for councillors to play an oversight role and for administrators to do the adjudication. And I think that that separation of powers is important, and we should expect that there should be a reduced pressure or reduced levels of pressure on councillors. But sometimes the expectation is that councillors make those decisions when in fact those decisions are supposed to be made through independent adjudication mechanisms or through adjudication mechanisms in the administration.
So, going back to the report itself, I know that there were recommendations that were made by SALGA, and amongst them is the development of a safety and security manual strategy. Talk to us about that.
Well, we think that it's important that we have an regular assessment of threats to councillors and emergency response. In certain instances where there are threats, there would have to be immediate mitigation mechanisms where there are immediate threats. We have found that in most of the instances where there have been killings, there have been prior threats. So whenever there is a threat against a councillor or a municipal official, we think that mechanisms need to be put in place to protect this. No. We're not calling for a blanket protection of all councillors. We're saying where there's a threat, we need to intervene so that we can prevent it. No. Because our study indicates that, in fact, almost all the killings are after a threat has been made. We are also finding that there's an increased threat on women councillors who feel more vulnerable in the municipalities and are highly intimidated as they execute their responsibilities. Right. And we're also finding that in most instances, people have an expectation that councillors should not exercise their responsibility with regards to oversight.
Okay. The report is very big, and I believe that we can, continue unpacking it in the coming days as well. But for now, we'll leave it at this. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, there you have it. That's Councillor Parks Tau, he's SALGA President, talking to us about the study that SALGA conducted, which determines the extent of violence and intimidation in local government structures. We take